On today's episode, we meet the amazing David Prager, the Chief Brand Officer of Debeers. We explore how his childhood dinner table debates have given him the tools to build diverse and successful teams. How as a leader, sometimes you have to accept 80% from individuals in order to achieve 120% as a team. And how going through failure is the essential learning piece of unlocking a successful career as an enterprise leader. Join us on Fall Forward as together we explore David's lifelong commitment to learning. I'll see you there. Perhaps give us an introduction to all things David Prager, what you're currently doing and perhaps what's brought you to where you are today.
I think most importantly, I'm a dad, two kids, Isla and Finn, who are and have entered and are entering teenagedom. So that's an experience in itself, and a wonderful wife, Keely. And beyond that, as you said, I'm currently Chief Brand Officer at Debeers for another 8 days. And I'm winding up my time at Debeers after 18 years and kind of taking stock of what we've all accomplished together. And it's been a tremendous journey, a fantastic company. And I'm sad to go, but really excited for another challenge. I've been in the UK. You can tell from my funny accent that I'm somehow muddled. I grew up in the New York area from the US. And I lived there till I was about 25, and I've been here for more than 20 years now. I'm British, I'm American, I've got British wife, British kids, British dog, British house, but still strong ties to America, where I like being often.
We've adopted you, David, is what you're saying.
Thanks, Steve.
And we're pleased to have you. And congratulations on 18 years. Why stay for 18 years? There must be something about the culture or the environment that meant you wanted to stay.
Yeah, do you know, I had heard for probably the last 10 of those 18 years from headhunters that would call from time to time who would say, you know, you should really think about moving. It's really time. You need to take the next step. And I always just ask myself, you know, why? I'm challenged. I'm happy. I'm progressing. I'm exposed to new things on a daily basis. And it's that kept me here at this fantastic company for 18 years. You know, De Beers is the only luxury brand in the world that goes all the way back to the source. And my role stretches from leading the consumer marketing team through to the corporate affairs team. You can imagine in the diamond industry, there's no shortage of issues, through to the sustainability team. And because it stretches from mining through to trading, all the way through to mass and then luxury retail, I'm exposed constantly to all different parts of the sector that kind of test different parts of my capability. I could be literally on a call about a community issue in South Africa or Botswana, and the next call might be about cutting our commercial that we're going to have for Christmas, and the next might be about what we're doing on the red carpet for the Oscars. And so that diversity of experience, diversity of capability, and the ability to work with all different people. When you're at De Beers, you're just as likely when you're eating in the restaurant over lunch to be sitting next to a geologist as you are to be sitting next to a jewelry designer. And that, to me, you know, the ability to learn constantly and mix with different people, one might say blend, Steve, with different people, has been really the joy of my career. And I've loved every second of it.
How important is lifelong learning in careers? I think people talk about it, but actually rarely does it become really lived. From what you've mentioned there, you're stretched daily. So how do you make sure that you are constantly stretched, and why is it so important?
Well, I have to say, I think as I started out in my career, so I joined De Beers in 2006. The company was going through the film The Blood Diamond, which was ostensibly a kind of fictionalized version of the company and the scourge of the blood diamond issue from the 1990s. And that was, a time of some crisis for the company. And it was a very fast learning curve at a very young age. And I found that I was kind of regularly the youngest guy in the room. And so I felt, as an ambitious young guy, I had to prove myself. I had to work harder, have better ideas, deliver better than anybody else. And I think you can do that when you can do that for a time, right? And then you kind of work yourself out of the ability to continue at that pace. And you realize the need to rely on those around you. And when you do that, you also realize that that is where the joy is. So you asked about continuous learning. I learn a lot about, my colleagues in mining would, I'm sure, disagree, but I've learned a lot about mining. I've learned a lot about luxury retail, and I've learned a lot about everything in between. But not because I'm taking courses on it, not because I've read a book, but because I sit with super talented people who are at the forefront of their profession. And I kind of, through osmosis, through curiosity, take from them and give, hopefully, to them those things that kind of, make my career more interesting, make my days more fulfilling, make it fun, make it joyful to work here. And so constant learning is critical, obviously, to be successful, but it's also critical to me for happiness and job enjoyment. Otherwise, you could stay someplace for 18 years, but I don't know how you would do so in a way that's fulfilling.
Yeah, I love that. It's that stewardship, that movement in your career from being challenged
Right.
to then stewarding others to facilitate your own growth. I love that. I love that consideration. David, when we first met, you shared with me that you started out at as an intern at the Clinton administration.
That's right, yeah.
So how did you get from what was hopefully, I'm sure, a career in politics to a career in one of the biggest fashion brands in the world? How did that happen?
Yeah, it's a bit of a circuitous route. How do you get from being a dog's body intern in Washington to living in London and being with a company like Debeers? You're right. My first role was as an intern in the White House during the Clinton administration, and I found it absolutely fascinating. I've always been interested in politics and interested in history and interested in the workings of government. And it was, when you're an intern, you're the lowest of the low. But I soaked up every minute of it. I remember I used to get to the White House at about 6:30 in the morning, not because that was when the job started, but I thought if I was there, I could soak in more. I would take the long way around when I was going to meetings, so I could walk by the Oval Office in the West Wing, so I could walk past people in the hallways. And I found it fascinating. I always kind of thought what I would do following that was go into political campaigns. I thought that was going to be my calling. And I worked on, at a very low level, worked on a few campaigns and found it was tremendously hard and unglamorous work. And happened to get an internship the next year with Ogilvy and started a career path at Ogilvy that would take me from New York to London. I would encourage anybody who's in the kind of brand space, communications or marketing, to at least do a stint, if not a career, but at least a stint in agency life. Because, what I do at Debeers after 18 years is still grounded in the skills I've learned at an agency. Debeers doesn't teach you to be a communicator or a marketeer. It teaches you how to discover and sell diamonds. And agencies are geared, obviously, toward honing your craft as a communicator or a marketer or a creative. And that has been the foundation for me for my career. Ogilvy took me to London, where I thought I'd be for a year. And more than 20 years later, I'm still here. I passed by AstraZeneca on the way. I've always been attracted to businesses and brands with issues that don't have plain sailing. And Pharmaceuticals and diamonds, I'm sure you can imagine, Steve, have plenty of those issues. Um, AstraZeneca was fantastic. I not only made great friends there, but found my wife. And so I'm forever grateful for those 3 years and that role. And then Debeers, as I said, entered in a communications leadership role to handle the fallout of the Blood Diamond film. And from there, hard work, good ideas, good team, continued to build what was a nascent corporate affairs function into something much larger, much more powerful for the business. We built out, I think, a world-leading sustainability platform called Building Forever. We're in the throes now of building a real purpose-led consumer brand that our clients are really responding to.
Thank you. And I think a couple of things I'd really like to touch on there. Clearly, you like, as you said, you like the challenge, you like the issues. I mean, yeah. Clinton administration, diamonds, of course, pharmaceutical, of course. Where does that come from? Where does that come from? Your desire to, well, not necessarily to fix, but to influence and manage the narrative around key issues. Is that from childhood, or is it just something that you've always had?
It is from childhood. It comes from the kitchen and dinner table when I was growing up. I've got an older brother who lives in Switzerland, who's in the same kind of work, communications work. And I've got parents who encouraged us to debate issues and current events at the dinner table, asked us what we thought, and pushed us to defend our position. I found those debates to be invigorating. And it's funny, I try to stimulate the same events with same discussions with my 13 and 11-year-old now. And I realize it's not that easy. They're not that interested. And I'm sure I was a little bit of the same at the time. But man, it was a training ground for me. And I kind of thought, well, that's just how everybody grows up. All right. I thought, my mom, funny enough, my mom owned a catering business, a corporate catering business at the time when I was growing up. And so we would do two things at dinner. First, she would try out her new dishes on myself, my brother, and my dad. And so I kind of thought, well, that's just like how kids grow up, with these fantastic, elaborate catered dinners every night in the home. And then secondly, over those dinners, we would have these really robust, fantastic discussions where our parents pushed us to, as I said, give our view, defend our opinion, and engage with the other person and do it respectfully. And I think understanding the nuance of an argument, understanding the skill it requires to stand in somebody else's shoes, understand their point of view, and then take that back in to your own perspective, or later in life to your own business and brand, has been tremendously helpful for me, and it's invigorating. I'm always interested in a debate about an issue, if it's done respectfully and it's done with facts.
I love that you can pinpoint where that comes from, and on a previous episode, we were talking about how that changes, or how that is changing for the younger generations. Obviously, my kid's about to hit teenage years as well, and we also try and have those conversations around the table to form the ideas and form the critical thinking, because I think the bit that you really hit on there, which is to question your own biases, isn't it? Is to flex your muscles about the idea of, am I really thinking the right things here, and are you asking the right questions of each other and yourself, to make sure that you're always pushing yourselves forward. How do you think, with the rate, we're going to go down a rabbit hole slightly here, but with AI is going to change, obviously, how all of us work in our working lives. One of those things that someone talked to me about the other day was that our roles will become more of an editing type role, no matter what we do, than so much a kind of fulfilling the role type, our role. And in that, there needs to be an understanding of what's right and what's wrong, or understanding your views and opinions. How do you see that changing in the generations? Because, you clearly had that formative conversations around dinner table. Do you think that's something that is easier for younger generations or harder because of the pervasiveness of social media and news and so on and so forth?
Yeah, it's undoubtedly harder. It's undoubtedly harder. Trying to understand the context in which my kids take in information, or any of our kids take in information. I think the most important thing is to acknowledge I can't appreciate it. I can't understand it. And nor, for that matter, could my parents understand how I took in information. And so what's my role? My role is, as I see it, and my wife's role is to ensure that they are grounded in the fundamentals. They're grounded in a sense of values, an understanding of what is right and wrong, and how to think critically about the information that they take in. And it's a conversation we have all the time where, I basically get them to prove to me in different words than this, but why what they're telling me that they found on the internet isn't BS. Explain, because that sounds, what you're telling me, sounds pretty great. God, wow, I can get a house for $1? That sounds great. Explain to me how that works. And so getting them to talk through with critical thinking and a core set of values, the information they're taking in, and then sharing with friends, I think is my job. I'm not, I've given up trying to, beyond the obvious things of kind of monitoring social media intake, given up the idea that I'm going to be able to control it. And so rather, how do I give them the tools to handle it, to navigate it, so that they come through as undamaged as possible on the other side. The other thing I would say, and you talked a little bit about it earlier, is you can't possibly be a critical thinker if you do not seek out diversity of opinion and diversity of thought. And so for me as a leader, I push myself to make sure that the teams I'm constructing, and these might be actual teams, formal teams with people with titles, but also a team that you put together on the fly over lunch to discuss something, has a diversity of people in it. Now that might mean the obvious thing that diversity means, diversity of background, of race, of religion, of creed, but it also means diversity of point of view, diversity of experience. And undoubtedly, the lesson I've learned in my career is that when you do that, and when you are intentional about it, you get better results. You get smarter outputs. You're more creative. You are more innovative as a group. You're more resilient. Take Debeers, for example. I'm a male executive working for 18 years in a company that sells a product 99% of which is consumed by women. Now, I think I'm fairly smart and fairly intuitive, but the smartest thing I know is that I am not the target audience, and I have to seek out a diversity of understanding to understand how people feel about our product, how people feel about our brand, our retail experience, the issues that we face. And when I do it, and when I'm intentional about it, I see the success results, or the success. And when I don't do it, I see that as well. I can tell.
We absolutely, obviously, are advocates of this, and I think it's seeing the opportunity that often is lost. Is that you've clearly been able to identify the failures and also the uptick from when you've been able to do that. Before we dig on that a little bit, there's one thing that you mentioned earlier that I kind of don't want to lose sight of, because you talked a bit about with your children about creating values and giving them the tools to be able to almost identify and align to their purpose in time. But you also spoke to that when you were talking about Debeers. You were talking about the importance of brand purpose and building that brand purpose over those 18 years. Why is it so important to have a brand purpose? Why is it so critical for you?
Yeah, it's such a great question, Steve. So one of the things I'm most proud of in my time at Debeers is the brand purpose we launched for Debeers. And before I tell you what that purpose is, I'll tell you how we went about creating it. As I said at the beginning of our discussion, Debeers is a very diverse business. Diverse in terms of what we do: mining, rough diamond trading, exploration, marketing, jewelry design, retail. Diverse in where we do it. I was on a call last week with two members of my team. One was in Namibia, where it was 40 degrees Celsius above zero, and the other was in the Northwest Territories of Canada, where it was 40 degrees below 0 Celsius. Right, so an 80-degree disparity in temperature, all on the same team, all working toward the same goal and the same purpose. So huge amount of diversity, and it was really important to me when we built or created a brand purpose for the company, that we did so in a way that included and spoke to all of them. You know, we talk about brand purpose as the thing that gets you out of bed in the morning and gets you excited about work. Well, the thing that gets you excited in the morning to go hunting and exploring for diamonds somewhere in a remote part of, let's say, Angola, versus the thing that gets you out of bed if you're in Shanghai and you're running a retail store is very different. And how do you speak to both of those audiences? And so we ran an inclusive process that included a steering committee with people representing all of those different parts of the business, not the top people in those businesses, but people who were vocal, who had a sense of values, who were up and comers in the company and who wanted to participate. We ran focus groups around what motivated people, what the brand meant to them, what the product meant to them, what their work meant to them. And what we found was that there was a commonality in the value of the product in a different way across the value chain. In North America, when you give a diamond, you give it to express love and emotion and commitment, asking somebody to marry you or celebrating an anniversary or a big life event. But it is a symbol. It is a marker of something that is deep and emotional. And what we found is, for different reasons, where diamonds come from, diamond communities, it plays the same role. Diamonds represent, in a country like Botswana, where a third of the economy is of the GDP of the economy is built on diamond revenues. It represents education. It represents healthcare. It represents infrastructure, because the government, in partnership with Debeers, has done such a remarkable job over the past 50 years to use their resource to build socioeconomic opportunity for the people. So people looked at the product and looked at the brand, and what did they see? Love, commitment, long-termism, and forever, and a real brilliance. And so, part of building a brand purpose is about getting it nailed down to a few words and being pithy. And so the brand purpose of Debeers is to make life brilliant, to make life brilliant for our communities, to make life brilliant for our employees, and to make life brilliant for the people who buy, wear, and pass down our diamonds. And it's been a really powerful purpose that's galvanized people around the business and kind of knitted them together in a way they otherwise might not have been.
I love the approach to that, David. I think when you've got such a diverse range of operations in a business, stakeholder engagement can be really, really difficult. And I can't imagine that was an easy thing to do. How long did it take, and what did you learn? What were some of the things that perhaps went wrong in the process that perhaps for someone listening that you be able to offer as advice to them?
It took us about 6 months to do it, and do it well, and to hold focus groups. Part of that was just logistics, being all over the world. I think you got to hold to a vision. right? You can go down, as I said, when you have a business that has so many disparate parts in so many different places around the world, you can go down rabbit holes quickly about things that are really important to parts of the business, but less so to the whole. And so the job of the person running that process is to hold to a central vision. What is it we're trying to accomplish? What are the values we're trying to represent? And if you can do that and kind of pull people back to the center, you'll get a great result.
Yeah.
And the other thing to say is you can short circuit that process, right? You can get clever people, you can get copywriters in a room in a week to write a line. And maybe you can come up with a line I think is pretty good, make life brilliant. Maybe you can come up with that in a week. But the most important part of building a brand purpose wasn't the line, it was the process. It was the authentic knowing around the business that we had taken the time to ask and we're really interested. And we didn't just take in the information, we fed back to the organization what we heard and how that helped us in the end craft the line. So the output is the line, but the line isn't the point. The exercise is the point. And it's really powerful if you're willing to spend the time on it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the connectiveness to that purpose for those people across the organization is key, isn't it? And being engaged in that is critical. So thank you. The theme of our podcast is often around the opportunities that come from failure, opportunities of when we get things wrong, learning and applying new things. Before I talk to you about failure, I think it's often interesting to ask somebody their view of success. So how do you define success, and has that definition evolved over time?
Wow, it's certainly evolved over time, and it's probably linked to how I think about failure as well. So I might hijack you, Steve, and combine the two. I mean, for me, success, what I used to think success was, I think was individual success. As I said, when I started out, I was the youngest guy in the room. So I'm kind of young, hotshot guy that worked his tail off, was up to all hours of the night, worked through the weekend, and I delivered. Man, I delivered and I delivered well. But I think I found a few years in, I wasn't taking people with me. Now, that doesn't mean, I didn't see the value in teams or I wasn't a team builder. I was a nice guy, got along with the team well, but I wasn't growing anybody. I wasn't particularly interested or demonstrating interest in the growth of the team and the individuals within it, and necessarily what contribution I could stretch them to make. And, I think that version of leadership only takes you so far. I mean, it's not leadership, but that version of operating only takes you so far. And what I learned was that I can be far more successful as an individual if I accept the role of what it means to be a leader. And being a leader means not just kind of faking being interested in the team, but actually authentically in your gut, worrying about or being focused on what the team needs to excel. And when you do that, and you do that authentically, you can do things that you could never possibly do on your own. So when I think of, interestingly, people on my team will know that, whenever you're in those awkward team meetings or on Zoom calls and you have to go around the room and introduce yourself, I never introduce myself as the chief brand officer. I'll always introduce myself as a member of the brand team. And I do that partly to make a point, but also because that's where the joy is for me. The success is being part of a team that's accomplishing something great, not being some person sitting at the top that didn't do the work, but is taking all the glory. And I think, you can set an example where people understand if you are team oriented, then they're expected to be team oriented as well, and you can get more out of people.
I think in all of the times that we've spoken together, and it's a few now, I think that comes through so clearly about you, David, in the way that you approach all conversations, your collaborative and open and friendly nature. And I think that that's something that is core to you. Was that part of you, or has that become part of you based on what you've just shared with us about that lesson to learn to be more outwardly, I suppose, than kind of focusing on yourself? Because it feels like it's
Yeah,
just you.
yeah. No, it's this is where we get into immodesty, but no, I've always been a nice guy, right? I've 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 always been a nice guy, not a confrontational guy, and I would have been, I think, known as a bridge builder. I would have been known, probably still am known, as the guy who can take, particularly here in Debeers, disparate part of an organization with different needs, different orientation, different points of view, and do the hard work to listen to people and stitch parts of the business together. I think I always had that skill. I think what I've come to learn, though, is bridge building is really important. It's an important skill to have. Um, but sometimes you got to respect the river, right? Sometimes the river flowing under the bridge needs to flow unencumbered. And building a bridge at all costs isn't necessarily the right answer. And so, you know, my role, I saw my role for a long time as um, creating links and patches within the organization. And I think whilst that is still a huge part of, I guess, my repertoire and what's important, I also understand the value in discomfort, the value in disagreement, if done respectfully, um, and the need to have people work through it. One of the great lessons I've learned in leadership is just because you have the answer to a problem doesn't mean you should give it. Sometimes it means you should give it, but often, just because you know how to do something or you've done something before, holding back and allowing people the freedom and the trust and the experience to find the answer themselves is far more beneficial for them in the long run, and for you and for the team dynamic. That requires them to trust you and you to trust them, and it's not easy, huh? Because you care about people and you're sitting there and you know they're racking with a problem, and you know I'm not masochistic. I give them guides, I give them nudges, but allowing them the freedom to figure out for themselves so that they know, and I haven't done it for them, has been a great lesson for me.
If I think about my leadership journey, I'd echo that, and actually I'd say that it's almost a leap of faith. It's that moment when you're riding the bicycle and taking your hands off the bars and just knowing that you're not going to fall off. Actually, it's okay. How do you do that? How do you take your hands off the handle? Because you're entrusting someone to do something they've never done before, often, and you may have all the answers, but you're absolutely right. Allowing them to learn themselves is far more powerful than you showing or telling them how to do that. And you may have to accept that you might get 80% of the outcome, not 100% of the outcome,
Yeah.
but that will lead you to hopefully a lot more. How would you encourage a leader who's perhaps stood there, sort of sat there listening to this going, well, how do I do that? How do I remove my my requirement to be in control of everything? What would you say?
Yeah, well, I think inherent in you've solved the problem for me, Steve, with your question, because I think inherent in your question is part of the answer. For me, the hardest thing I had to learn to do was accept 80%. And sometimes, by the way, you get 120%, right? So, but the bargain you have to make is it's not going to be the way you would have done it. And as I talked about, earlier, when I first started out, youngest guy in the room, the job every day was prove yourself, prove you belong there, prove you're a hard worker. And so kind of nothing went out the door without me looking at it, me rewriting it, reworking it, rethinking it. And I look back on that, not only was it, did it drain me? But it must have just been deflating to the people that were working with me, all hard workers who wanted to do a great job. And what the work they had done was really good, but not exactly how I would have done it. And so the learning I had to go through was to accept that different didn't mean worse, and that in that difference, I also might strike gold, right? And but that it takes trust. It takes you to be able to trust the people you work with, and that trust doesn't just happen. You have to provide the people that you work with the resource, with the information, with the skills, with the capacity, with the clarity they need to be able to be successful. Whether or not they're then successful is going to ultimately be down to them. But if you trust that you've given them the tools they need and trust that they've got the capability to do it, and you sit back and see what happens, great things can happen. And that's been my kind of experience. Far more often than not, I'm surprised by the caliber and quality of the things that come back. When I've done my job, I provided clarity and resource. The other thing I would say is I see my job now today as a leader as something very different than I did, 15 years ago. My job is to hold the vision of whatever it is we're doing, big or small. My job is not to know, if we're talking about marketing, the intricacies about, our search strategy or our social media strategy or analytics. I know they're important. I know we've got good people doing them. I know the resource, the clarity, the direction they need to be successful. But I no longer feel that my job is to understand it as well as they do. And actually, the joy is not understanding it and learning something from them every day. My responsibility to them is to hold to the vision, remind them of what it is we're trying to achieve, so that when they're focused on their piece of the puzzle, I'm looking at the whole jigsaw.
You so nicely talk about giving them the framework, the culture, and the environment to succeed. And by definition, you also give them the opportunity to fail. And walk me through your experience of leading through failure. So maybe an example when you've given someone the space to go and try it and make it, and perhaps they haven't. And or more generally, perhaps in the 18 years, I'm sure there's some wonderful anecdotes that you could share with us around the opportunities that come from failure that often we forget about as leaders. So how important is that environment to embrace the failure, from your experience at Debeers?
Yeah, there's a great quote from the Tom Hanks movie Apollo 13, when they're kind of floating around in the capsule and they're starting to panic. Actually, I think it's an Ed Harris quote, but everyone's starting to panic, and they're panicking at mission control. And Ed Harris kind of stops everybody, and he says, "We're not going to panic. We're going to work the problem." Maybe it was Tom Hanks. One of the two great actors said, "We're going to work the problem." And my kids hear me talk about this all the time. We're going to work the problem, work the problem. And that's, to me, how we approach things that don't go right within life and within business. The question is why? What's happened that hasn't gone right? What didn't we understand in our assumptions? What didn't we do in our execution? What is measurable? And so what? How is that failure going to advance our success? Right? It's only a failure to me if it ends there. Right? If we run a campaign that's not as successful as we thought it would be, if we communicate something that in a kind of industry leadership position that we wanted to affect one outcome and affected the other, those are all hugely valuable learnings. The failure is in not seeing it that way. The failure is in not capturing those learnings about what didn't go right and how we can improve it. And so, it's funny, you ask about failure. It's hard. Of course, there are plenty of failures, but it's hard to think of a catastrophic failure that we've had in the business, because, as I said, if failure is defined as only those things that are left to go wrong and then not learned from, you know, we've got very few of those. So failure is a learning experience that leads to success.
Firstly, I love the Apollo 13 movie, one of my favorites.
My kids are going to kill me for not remembering if it's Ed Harris or Tom Hanks.
I think it is Ed Harris, isn't it? Because he's got his nice white, nice white jacket from his wife. People, we're going to work the problem. Yeah,
we're going to work the problem. That's right.
But I love that, and I think the thing I like best about what you said there, David, is that it's only failure if that's the destination. And I think that's such an important point for us all to remember, is that if you stop or don't see it as the opportunity to improve, then yes, that is a failure. But actually, what you're saying is that actually you've probably not experienced catastrophic failure because you've worked the problem and turned it into an opportunity, or you've turned it into learning. And I think that's a really valuable lesson for people to learn from.
Yeah, you know, Steve, you know, people have that expression, I have no regrets in life, right? I have no regrets. And I always think to myself, like, what? That's crazy. I have it's what, noon on a Wednesday, Steve. I've got like a dozen regrets already today. So I think question for me, or at least that I try to live by, is, so what? You regret what you said to that person. You regret what you did on the train earlier today on your commute. You regret how you did that piece of work. So what? To me, the regret is only regrettable if you don't learn from it, if it doesn't make you better the next day. Those are the things that you can't let go of. The key is to be able to have regrets and let go of them because they make you better.
Yeah, I really like that. It only makes it regrettable if you give that context to it, for sure.
Yeah.
So as a leader, 18 years, I mean, that's an incredible stint to be working at such a senior level in an organization where, you know, the pace is relentless. How have you kept your effervescence for the brand and also for the organization? Because that's not easy, you know, that. And managing that work-life piece, that it's kind of all wrapped up into one piece. I'd love to understand how you've done that, because even today, with 8 days to go, your passion and a vigor for Debeers, it feels as strong as when I first met you a year or so ago. And that's amazing. And I think something that people hopefully would want to learn how you've managed.
I'm writing that down. It's the first time I've ever been called effervescent. So thank you. So thanks. I've been called bubbly, but never effervescent. I mean, you know, another thing I live by that, again, my kids are so bored of hearing, is the 10-90 rule. Life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it. And so in your career, in what you do, you've got agency. And, you know, I'm not most interested in being the most senior person in an industry in the country. I'm most interested in doing things that are invigorating, are interesting, are exciting, are fulfilling, are values-based. And that's why when, you know, as we talked about at the beginning of the conversation, when headhunters were saying to me 10 years ago, you know, you should really look, it's time to move and you got to build your CV. I thought, why? I'm happy, you know, I'm happy, and I'm not happy because I'm comfortable. I'm happy because I'm learning. I'm happy because every day is different. And when it's not, then that's when it'll be time to find something else. And so 18 years, it is still really interesting, but my sense is that there are other things out there that I can do before I kick it. So that's what I'm going to do.
We had the pleasure of spending time with Steve Bartlett last week, and he was talking about always filling those skills and knowledge buckets. And I feel what you've talked about is that you've in your 18 years have always been filling your skills and knowledge bucket. And I think that's something that I hope people take away today, is that your desire to always be learning and building your skills has meant that you've kept that that excitement and interest. And I think
Yeah.
it was something that Steve Bartlett talked about was, that if you do that, then the rest will come, and invest in that. And someone said to me when I was starting out in a career, he said, focus on the learning and then you can worry about the earning. And
Right.
and I think that's kind of the same thing, isn't it? And I think if you then could go back, I suppose, and give that one piece of wisdom to somebody who's maybe in that VP or SVP role looking to continue that journey up, what would you say to them to say, look, these are the things that I wish I knew then that I now know, that perhaps resonate with you now more than ever?
Yeah. And you're right. It was great hearing from Steve Bartlett and some of the, at a relatively young age, some of the fantastic insights he's got. I would say, the first thing I'd say to my younger self is you're going to fail a lot. And there are some things you just can't know until you go through it. The going through it is the lesson, right? It's not the kind of divergent off ramp. And in order to do a podcast with Steve G years later, you've got to have gone through it. You have to have the experience, and you got to understand what has worked for you, which will be different than the next person, and what doesn't. But the one thing I would absolutely say, that whether you're 60 or 40 or 20, you can know, and you can know early. It's that while you are looking up the corporate ladder or the whatever the ladder is, you also need to be pulling up. You need to be pulling up those around you. The only secret to success is not working harder. At least what I found, it's not working harder. It's not finding a secret piece of insight. It's not even having a great idea. All of those things are important, but they come from building an ecosystem in which people gravitate to you, in which they want to work for you and want to work with you. And they want to work with you because they know you value a diverse team. They know that you are genuinely interested in the opinions they give and what's happening in their context and in their life. They know that you can clearly articulate a vision and hold to that vision and hold others around them to the vision, and they trust you to do it. They know you're going to be honest with them and straightforward and clear and unambiguous, and that you owe that to them. And ultimately, and this to me is, the great lesson of leadership, is they know you're going to be human. And it's so easy. It's hard sometimes, as ridiculous as it sounds, it's hard sometimes to be human. It's hard sometimes to show vulnerability, to ask questions, to demonstrate that you don't know the answer to things. But when you do it, and you do it with confidence, it's like, I found it to be a totally liberating thing, and far more joyful to work that way and work with people who you also connect with on that level. And then with them, you can do great things, as we have.
Yeah, amazing. I couldn't agree more with everything you've said there. So in this section of the podcast, we ask you a question from one of our members in the community. And I think it's quite apt that we've picked this question because as somebody who's about to embark on their next leadership journey, the question is, what are your goals and aspirations for the future, David, both personally and professionally?
Personally, I think it's really simple and probably held by everybody who's watching this who's a parent, and that is ensure your kids are happy. My mother always said to me, you'll find you're only as happy as your least happy child. And so, I'm not saying anything profound. Doing those things that create happiness and a value system and the right relationships for my kids is, to me, the ultimate goal and marker of success. In my career, in business, I want to do exciting things. I want to work with people who have a deep-rooted sense of values who believe in a purposeful and purpose-led brand, and are interested in learning and innovating. And those all sound like really interesting and cool buzzwords. It's hard to find, in my experience. And you know, one of the I guess privileges that come with being a little bit further on in your career is you can take the time to see what it is you want to do and work with those people that you find interesting and invigorating. And so that's what I plan to do. But you notice I didn't say in there, you know, my idea of success is working for this FTSE or Dow Jones listed business, or working in this kind of role, or it's the kind of people I want to work with and the kind of work I want to do with them. That's my idea of success.
And I think that goes back to your skills and your knowledge. You're always thirsty to innovate and learn and expand your own thinking. So I think, thank you, David. I think that's really interesting. Our last section of the podcast is to ask you for a recommendation. Now, of course, being part of Blend is, of course, a recommendation for everybody if you're a leader in a large enterprise business. But it could be a vlog, it could be a book, it could be a product, it could be, frankly, anything. But something that you really value and that you'd recommend to other Blend members.
Yeah. First, join Blend if you haven't already. That's obvious. And I say that a little bit jokingly and sycophantically, Steve, but also seriously, because, you know, seeking out connections with people outside of your regular circle is tremendously important. And I think the work you guys are doing to facilitate that in a way that I haven't come across is really exciting. And so I wish you loads of luck as you build that in cities around the world. I think two recommendations. The first is a fantastic podcast that I'm sure a lot of people watching will have seen, but it's called The Rest is History, which is done by two historians, Tom Holland and Dominic Sambrook, and they go kind of twice a week deep on an episode of history that could be ancient Rome all the way through to, they're doing this week a series on the sinking of the Titanic. It could be Watergate, or they did one that I particularly liked on famous dogs in history. And I find it to be great escape. I live near Richmond Park in London. I put it on when I'm walking my dog in Richmond Park. I put it on during my commute in the morning, and it takes me out of the immediate work and it gives me escapism. And so if you like history, I would highly recommend that. And the other is, to me, the greatest book ever written, but a nonfiction book by Robert Caro, The Power Broker, which is about this thick. So I wouldn't recommend it for beach reading this spring or summer, but it's about Robert Moses, who is the architect of New York City in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, and what this man did for good and for ill to reshape the kind of landscape of that city. And the force of will of him to do what he did is just like a remarkable story in human capability and human failing. And so I would definitely commend that book to people who haven't read it. But tuck in, it's a long one, but it's amazing.
I love that, and perhaps it might be one that we add to the Blend Book Club for a review to save you perhaps digesting the whole thing. But David, thank you for that. Thank you for your recommendations. Thank you for your openness. Thank you for the support of everything that you're doing with us here at Blend. We really appreciate it. You brought up a movie earlier, Apollo 13, which happened to be one of my favorite movies also. I remember there's a quote in that movie where one of the directors comes in and says, I think he says, "Holy crap, this is going to be NASA's worst failure." And I think the gentleman turns around to him, he says, "With all due respect, sir, this is going to be our finest moment." And I think that quote embodies everything that we've talked about today about using or taking the opportunity of failure to improve and develop and grow. And thank you for all your openness to talk about your lessons of leadership and learning, and I hope people watching will take that with them. And we hope that people reach out to you and pick your brains on all things
Please.
David and on all things Debeers, and maybe even Clinton administration. I'm sure they will as well. But thank you so much, David, for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here on the podcast, and we wish you very, very well in the next stage of your career, and we look forward to keeping conversations with you going.
Thanks, Steve. It's been my pleasure.
Thanks, David. Have a great day. Make sure you subscribe to the 4 Forward channel so you don't miss any new episodes. I'll see you soon.